Atlus, the studio best known for the Persona series, have delivered a brand new take on the JRPG genre, Metaphor ReFantazio. And while I'm a big fan of Persona, seeing their signature JRPG style reworked from a high school setting into a medieval fantasy one didn't really excite me that much at first. Therefore, I approached Metaphor ReFantazio with some trepidation. Could the titans of JRPG truly deliver a fantasy epic that avoids cliché and lives up to the acclaim of Personas 3, 4, and 5? Well, I'm glad I gave Metaphor a shot, because what I found defied all my high expectations, and I walked away having had the best RPG experience of the year. But for all its acclaim, Metaphor is not without some flaws. So in this review, I'll evaluate the story, gameplay, performance, and other aspects with nuance, so by the end you'll truly know if it's the right game for you. And while I'm a big Persona fan, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are too, I'll avoid comparing Metaphor to Persona throughout this review, as a lot of major publications' reviews simply do not stop evoking this comparison, so my review will judge Metaphor ReFantazio on its own merits. Well, with that well and truly out of the way, let's dive right into the review of this lengthy and complex game. On the continent of Uchronia, a magical medieval kingdom populated by 9 different tribes, or races, the king is suddenly slain by opportunist General Lord Luis in an attempt to seize power for himself. Unbeknownst to the Kingslayer, the king's death activates the late monarch's contingency plan. Through the king's magic, a months-long tournament begins in his name. The royal candidate who amasses the most public support by the deadline will be crowned the new king. You play as a young member of a conspiracy who is secretly sheltering the previously thought to be dead rightful heir to the throne, the prince. With the prince stricken by a death curse, it's up to you to unite the 9 tribes, break the prince's curse, stave off attacks by other candidates and the fanatical central church who desire power for themselves, find out the reason for the sudden appearance of hideous monsters across the continent, and ultimately defeat Lord Luis and restore the nobility to the throne. And if that weren't a tall enough order, the protagonist belongs to the Elder Tribe, the lowest and most discriminated against of the 9 races. With only a novel that depicts a utopian world not dissimilar to our own to guide him, will our protagonist truly save his kingdom? That was probably the most concise premise I could give to this insanely complex game. And that was indeed just the premise. This is a 90+ hour journey that takes all manner of twists and turns before eventually reaching its satisfying conclusion. Don't worry, I won't spoil any of the story here, but I'd just like to comment on how the story is told. Like the game itself, you'll have hours-long story sections before getting into hours-long gameplay sections. So I suppose this review will mirror that alternating structure. I'll get into the gameplay in a bit. Just let me start with this. The story, storytelling, and characters are nothing short of outstanding. This game has by far the best story of any game I've played this year. I was gripped throughout, compelled to keep playing to find out what happens next. The characters are insanely well written, with the entire main and supporting cast going through well-developed character journeys that really hone in on each one's strengths and flaws, and takes each character's arc to satisfying and emotional conclusions. A medieval setting with anime aesthetics is a match made in heaven. Coupled with such an excellent story means Metaphor ReFantazio will go down in history as one of the best efforts the JRPG genre has produced so far, with its excellent story delivered the way only JRPGs can. Not only is the story compelling, but it does not shy away from heavy themes like religion, politics, and discrimination. It's a risky gambit for the studio to put taboo topics at the forefront of its story, especially in this current social climate, but all the heavy-handed themes are handled with nuance and grace, the likes of which I didn't expect. Hats off to the writing and localization teams here. Alright, let's get into the gameplay. Where do I start with this? Well, let's start with battles. You'll be doing a lot of dungeon crawling in this game. Enemies can actually be attacked in the overworld, and you're incentivized to do so. If you can hit them enough times to stun them before transitioning into the turn-based battle screen, you'll do pre-battle damage and gain an extra turn. On harder difficulties, this is absolutely a must to succeed. Surprisingly, this part wasn't janky at all, and the action-based controls are smooth, fluid, and exciting. But once you get into turn-based battling, this is where Metaphor is truly cooking. Each party member is assigned an archetype, essentially a class that will determine their abilities and stats. These range from sword fighters, gunners, knights, mages, brawlers, and so on. You'll need to not only equip them before battle, but grow them on the archetype screen. You do this by collecting mag crystals from battles or other tasks. Ensuring each character inherits or studies a variety of archetypes is the way to go, as skills and moves are transferable between them. The more you study, the more skills you'll access to build the best and most versatile characters you can. It's a complex system system, especially at first. This is the richest and most complicated of all of Metaphor's main systems, and might be a bit overwhelming for players not well versed in JRPGs. It's for this reason I wouldn't recommend Metaphor as your first ever JRPG, but if you've played other games in the genre, it shouldn't be too hard to figure it out. But whether you're versed in the genre or not, keep in mind you'll be spending a lot of time on this screen experimenting with different builds. On one hand, it's a revelation having such an insanely customizable RPG experience. On the other hand, there's potential for frustration if you build a character to your liking but then not see it pay off in battle. And this will happen a lot. All too often did I challenge a boss, only to discover on the first turn that multiple party members had an elemental weakness and got wiped out immediately, meaning I'd have to go back to the archetype screen and rebuild my party with what I'd learned. This felt kinda like a waste of time, starting what's supposed to be a long battle, realizing I wasn't equipped properly, skipping through turns to trigger game over, and rebuilding my teams again. While before dungeon crawling, you can spend a bit of money to get hints to know what kind of boss you'll be up against and what its weaknesses are. It's not always clear exactly what it's going to be, and you will have received that hint hours before challenging the boss itself, so it's all too easy to screw up. It's the consequence of having a ridiculously customizable RPG to begin with, so there were times where I just had to grin and bear it. But the battles themselves, especially when you're prepared correctly, are satisfying as hell. Hitting the opponent's weaknesses or landing a critical hit lands you an extra turn. Conversely, if they hit your weakness, they get an extra turn. Herein lies the central puzzle. Set up your teams for the best success or get wiped out. There's nothing more satisfying than landing successive critical hits and wiping out all enemies on the first turn. This is incentivized too, as you'll be rewarded with more experience and currency, and this is absolutely the name of the game here. So in terms of battles, Metaphor has an excellent battle system for experienced gamers, but it'll come off as a bit too overwhelming for beginners. And speaking of difficulty, this is where we come to Metaphor's biggest flaw: its difficulty settings. Having played Atlus's Persona 3 Reload entirely on hard mode earlier this year, I went into Metaphor with the same difficulty expectation. Starting it on hard went well, but once the archetype system got going, it was all too easy to mess up. You don't know what kind of fight you're getting into half the time, so even with your well-balanced archetype, the chance of instant failure is too high. And these bosses themselves are actually really tough. There were times I got my ass handed to me by a boss, so I got frustrated, knocked the difficulty back to normal to beat it, then cranked it back up to hard. After about 2/3 into the game, I just gave up and kept it on normal the whole time. Maybe that's my own hubris, thinking I could handle a brand new JRPG on hard, but unlike Atlus's last RPG, hard mode here is actually that. Hard. I'd recommend you do your first playthrough on normal to mitigate your frustration, no matter how versed you are in JRPGs. Besides battling, here's the next crucial system of Metaphor: time management. When you aren't in dungeons or sitting through hours of cutscenes, you're exploring towns and accomplishing other tasks. You have to build support with your allies by talking to them or occasionally doing side quests with them. Building support unlocks bonuses like store discounts, in addition to bonuses granted for that NPC's linked archetype. It's not only encouraged but necessary to get the full amount of story content, as each of these side character storylines flesh out the world and characters more. Some opportunities to build support are gated off by royal virtues or social stats that you'll also need to build by doing other tasks. As you're under time pressure in this game, you get 2 opportunities per day to focus on these. Time also passes by dungeon crawling or doing other side quests like the Colosseum. It's a tricky balance managing your time, but I managed to max out all virtues and relationships by the end of the game, as that's what I found the best value in doing. But as a consequence, I barely progressed through the Colosseum and couldn't defeat each optional super boss. Every player will have a different experience in this aspect, and that's a great thing. Just don't expect to accomplish all of it, so at least you'll have some new content to see on your second playthrough. What I really like is how these gameplay and story elements combine in service of the ultimate narrative here. Every task you accomplish will increase the protagonist's popularity, which is the narrative thrust of the adventure itself. Doing side story tasks also rewards mag and unlocks bonuses for archetypes, so every single system here feeds into each other, making for a rewarding gameplay loop where nothing feels like a waste of time or a missed opportunity. As a result, Metaphor is one of those RPGs you won't be able to put down. I felt compelled to keep playing, not only wanting to know what happens next in the story, but to see my characters grow in both stats and in their character development. This is the goal of the JRPG genre, and I'd call it flawless here. As for the technical side of things, I played the PS5 version. I didn't find anything wrong with the performance, the frame rate and resolution looked consistent throughout. I'm not an expert on these things, but I didn't notice a single performance issue. As I'm still relatively new to the high-spec experience of PS5 gaming, I was just blown away by how fast and responsive this game is. Loading times are virtually non-existent, and battles happen quickly and smoothly without any downtime. Long move animations and battle clear screens can be skipped with the press of a button, with no lag whatsoever, so you get a really fast and streamlined experience, the likes of which I'm still getting used to. Having grown up on Pokemon where battles can be a slog, the brisk pace of metaphor battles thanks to the performance capabilities of the PS5 felt like a revelation. Granted, this isn't a 4K 120fps mo-capped playable movie, but basically a playable anime. The art style is absolutely goated here and does all of the heavy lifting in terms of visuals. I love all these character and enemy designs, but the bosses is where the art department has really earned their salary. These bosses are nightmarish abominations that the likes of little old me could never dream of conjuring up. And then there's the interface. Boring, boxy menus have been thrown out the window in favor of something striking, stylish, and beautiful. Interfaces have never looked so damn cool. The art, characters, and UI are a true sight to behold, and a new platinum benchmark for the already brilliant Atlus standard of art direction. Finally, the music and sound. You don't need me to tell you how goated Shoji Meguro is as a composer, and his work here is perhaps his finest yet. The music is film-worthy, epic orchestra, with each region of the game taking on its own unique ethnic flair, really fleshing out the world of Metaphor. And man, this battle theme. I really don't know what possessed him to include a Buddhist monk chanting in the main battle theme you'll be hearing for most of the journey. When I first heard it, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it, but it really grew on me. Just listen to this. I have no idea what he's saying, but what a bop and a half. And I'm already listening to this soundtrack on my daily commute as it's up on all streaming services. A soundtrack for the ages. And finally, the voice acting. Unsurprisingly, excellent vocal performances across the board, with the cast bringing the already brilliant localization to life. I alternated between both the English and Japanese voice casts, and both are of equal standing. So, to bring this lengthy review of a lengthy game to a close, Metaphor ReFantazio from Atlus is one of the best JRPGs ever made, and a true culmination of everything that makes the genre and the studio so great. While it is a long game, taking me about 90 hours to clear, and it is not very approachable to newcomers thanks to its complicated systems, and there are some issues with its difficulty settings, none of these gripes can overshadow what is truly a remarkable role-playing game. With its compelling and moving story, addictive and satisfying battles and world exploration, and stellar visual and audio presentation, Metaphor ReFantazio is a masterpiece that has already cemented its place in gaming history, and will be long discussed and played for many years to come. For fans of Atlus, JRPGs, and gaming in general, Metaphor ReFantazio is a must play. Yo, thanks for sticking around until the end. Hey you, yes you, have you played Metaphor ReFantazio? What's your favourite JRPG? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know down in the comments below, and as always, I'll reply to you. And help a brother out by hitting the like and subscribe buttons while you're down there. I'd really like to get this channel to 300 subscribers by the end of the year. Alrighty, so I'm off to play Sonic X Shadow Generations. So have a good one, and I'll see you next time.